So maybe we can go ahead and get started, and then if others join, that's fine. So my name is Stephanie, and I am here to speak about integration of daily life into spirituality. And I was invited by Kalyan Yoga, by Adam and Sabina, with whom I did the Hridaya teacher training last fall and winter. I just want to say I'm really grateful to be here. I'm really grateful to you both and to Kalyan Yoga for creating this opportunity, this beautiful sharing of these various beautiful topics and getting to hear from various people and different perspectives. It's a lovely project. And just some technical things. So I'm at a co-working space. So if you hear any conversation in the background, I'm sorry, but that's what that is. I thought it was kind of perfectly fitting for this topic today, actually, of integration of daily life and spirituality. So this is what it is. How about we begin first with just taking a moment to fully arrive. So finding ourselves in a comfortable seated meditative posture and letting our eyes gently close and taking a deep breath in and exhaling everything out. And again, inhaling and exhaling everything out. Letting go of any thoughts or concerns about the past, about the future. And simply allowing ourselves to rest in this present moment. Hearing any noises we may hear, perhaps feeling a gust of wind on our skin, or feeling the fabric of our clothes. And just being here now. We begin to bring our awareness to our heart center in the middle of the chest, a little to the right. And coming into an intimacy with the depths of our being. With our hearts. And in this closeness with our hearts, perhaps feeling a sense of coming back home. To who, to what we really are. And keeping this intimacy with this essence of our being. We can slowly open the eyes as we feel ready. So, welcome everybody. Those of you who are live now or viewing this video later, we'll be speaking today. I'll be giving a short talk of around 25 minutes around this topic of integration of daily life into spirituality. So I'll speak about a couple different aspects around what we mean by integration, how I view the process, and then some attitudes, some ways to approach integration or that can be supportive, and then also some things to keep in mind. So before we begin about even speaking about integration, I wanted to speak about the two elements of spirituality and daily life. Spirituality, I feel, can be very specific to each person and whatever path they may be walking. And in this context of us talking about integration, there's this reference to these truths that we access, that we connect to on our path, and perhaps through direct experience, we come to hold these views or these beliefs. So I'd like for us just to take a moment to ask ourselves, what is spirituality to you? And what beliefs or views do you hold from this path that you're walking? And now let's take a moment to think about daily life. So, what does your daily life look like to you? And when I mention daily life, it's a lot of what comes to mind for me is a lot of these daily doings and happenings and beings from this place of me, Stephanie, and in this world as I know it, that I visibly see it. And that can include, the stories that I have, the personality that I have. It can include the mundane, the repetitive as well, the desirable, the difficult, the problematic. So just really thinking about, what does daily life look like to you? And then I want us to sit with the question of, where are there disconnects? Are there any disconnects between what our spirituality looks like and what those beliefs that we have look like, and what our daily life looks like? And if there are, which in my case there are, and I feel for many there are, this is where the integration takes place, and why the integration takes place is to bring these two together. An example of the need for integration is like after a meditation retreat, or even time out in wild nature, like a camping trip, where one's just in direct connection with nature, and having this perhaps intense experience of profound depth and beauty, and then returning to daily life and the paradigms that we live in outside of that intense experience. Sometimes that can feel jarring. It can feel like living in two worlds. It can feel like being two different people. It can feel like having one foot in one world, one foot in another. I know that for myself, this is definitely something that I've experienced, and I'm curious if anybody else has ever felt this. This is where the the sort of importance of integration comes in. And what I refer to when I speak about integration is this bringing together of this view and these knowings of these truths that we have and that we hold when we get these glimpses, when we get these moments of remembrance, and merging that, coexisting, having that coexist with and encompass all that is our daily life and the doings of the ego. Um, and it's important because if we just have the view and yet we're out there living life in this completely different way, misaligned way, what good is that of having the view? So it's I'm I find a lot of value and importance in this process and in this act of integration. Um, so I'll speak a little bit about how I view integration, or something that's helped me at least in the process of integrating daily life into spirituality. Um, a metaphor that has resonated a lot for myself is this sense of home and this sense of coming back home, or leaving home and then coming back. And home, I mean this, in saying home, I reference these moments of that remembrance of who and what we really are. This sense of awareness, this sense of connection. And sometimes we may experience for the first time this sense of feeling at home, truly at home, perhaps in almost a surprising way, from an intense and profound experience. And I feel like this is the first step, starting to walk the path, finding some stability in the path, whatever your path may be, and becoming familiar, encountering, visiting this feeling, this home, and this sense of home for the first time, and creating this familiarity with that sense of home, with this place of self-remembrance. And when I mean self, I don't mean this, me, Stephanie, but this self, this essence, this who and what I really am. So following on this analogy of this home, so this first step of perhaps in intense experiences or in teachings and in our path, we encounter this sense of home. And the next part is around this sort of strengthening this sense of home, this home, as one would with any home, sort of building out the structure and creating more stability in it, strengthening around it. And I see this as exploring different ways to really bring strength and stability to these truths that we connect to, that we access. And this can happen through a couple different things that I've observed. One is living, as I mentioned, sort of these intense or profound experiences that may come, for example, from a meditation, from a silent retreat, from a moment of profound connection with nature, in even plant medicines and ceremonies, if that's part of your path. But living and revisiting these intense experiences can help us really become even more familiar with the sense of home and strengthen that sense of home. As well, practices and rituals can support us in strengthening this sense of home. So that could be, if we have a meditation practice, a yoga practice, depending on the path that you're on, perhaps the temescal or sweat lodge every week is part of your practice or ritual. And that really helps to strengthen this foundation, this sense of home, this place of remembrance, so that it may be something that yeah, I know that place, and I know where that place is and how to come back to it. So through things like these intense experiences, practices, rituals, and even reminders, we can really start to shape and create this more stable structure, this sense of home, this place of remembrance. So in terms of reminders, maybe that's working with the power of place and creating an altar, or having a special place of practice where we always practice. And that can become part of the stability that we have, of this sense of home. Rituals can help, as I mentioned before, or even symbols. Are there symbols around our house or that we carry with us, perhaps on a bracelet, something that can keep reminding us where this place of remembrance is and how to come back and where that address of home is? Um, there's this one technique that's shared at Hridaya that is simply putting an A or a C on somewhere on your hand where you can see it, and every time you see it, awareness, consciousness. And having that symbol as a reminder can be a wonderful way to sort of strengthen and stabilize that sense of home, that place of remembrance, so that we can know where and how to come back to. And again, building more on this idea of home, kind of as an analogy for this sense of spirituality and those beliefs and these truths, is this idea of trying to rest in that place of home, in this remembrance, as much as possible, as often, inhabiting this place of remembrance and this home as much as possible, and thinking of it almost like this home that we inhabit, where we remember who and what we really are. And knowing that this is a place where we inhabit, that we can also come back to and keep coming back to, should we get pulled away, or should we find ourselves out and roaming about. And it's sort of this inhabiting of this home that I think of this, that brings me to think of this nuance of in integrating daily life into spirituality, versus the other way around. It's sort of this stable home that we hope to rest in more and more, and becomes this home that we rest in. That is the spirituality that can then, welcome, embrace, encompass, and welcome in the things of daily life into that home. So yeah, I really love this nuance of incorporating and inviting in daily life into that home of remembrance and spirituality, versus trying to just find little places where spirituality and remembrance can fit into our daily life. And the next part of integration, and following again along with this analogy of home, is looking at life and evaluating and bringing awareness to what takes us away from home. Meister Eckhart, a Christian mystic, has this beautiful line where he says, "God is at home, and it is we who have gone out for a walk." And I love that, and I feel it's very relevant here to consider that and think about ourselves as sometimes taking a walk away from this place of God or remembrance, or whatever you want to call it, and being perhaps even sometimes pulled, not even willingly walking, but being pulled and taken from ourselves, from this home, and bringing awareness to, asking ourselves, getting curious, what are the things that take me, that pull me away from myself, from this truth, from this remembrance, from this place of home. And a good question to ask, I wrote it, is, what would your partnership, family, work look like from a place of resting in this truth, with this trust in the divine, or this remembrance, or this trust in great mystery, the great spirit, and noticing where things are out of alignment, and also where there has been conditioning, and simply noticing and becoming aware and trusting that with awareness over time, perhaps that can start to bring the shift just through that awareness, without judgment, without forcing anything. Yeah, just seeing where there's misalignment, and also, of course, coming from a place of really wanting to shift, though. That's another great question to ask oneself, is seeing these misalignments and asking, am I really willing to shift? Is this something I want to shift? So that's a bit about how I've kind of see this process of integration, this existence of spirituality and of daily life, and how daily life can be more and more invited in, and almost encompassed by, dissolved in these truths that we hold in our path, in our spirituality. Welcomed home, this place of remembrance. I will speak next about a couple of attitudes or things to cultivate for integration. So in the face of these moments of being taken away from ourselves, from our home, from forgetting even, what are a few things to cultivate, or attitudes or approaches to cultivate? So I've highlighted a few, and I'll go through them a little bit quickly because I see that I've taken up some more time at the beginning than I planned for. So the first is this self-remembrance, this constant reminding and taking moments to remember what we really are, to come back to that awareness, to step back and see beyond the ego. And that can be really helpful in this process of integrating daily life into spirituality, because we can then see the limitations, see the attachments that we have that present themselves in daily life. And in those moments, coming back to that remembrance can really help us let go. Let go of the stories, let go of the personality, let go of the fears, and really remember who and what we really are. There was a couple practices that I thought of that could be really helpful for this, and I won't go through them all. But there's this neti, which is not this, not that. And so perhaps sometimes when we're really enmeshed and immersed in our daily life, we can just run through this practice of, am I this? No, not this, not that. I'm neither this story, I'm neither this desire, I'm not this feeling, I'm not this fear. And it can really help to just clear away and bring some clarity, and bring back that remembrance and a sense of presence. Another one, practice that is really helpful is, of course, coming from Hridaya, where one of the key practices and approaches that we hold there is self-inquiry. So from Ramana Maharshi, this beautiful question of who am I, can be very supportive in this practice of remembrance, in this attitude of remembrance. and sometimes cutting straight through all that can sometimes feel like is building up in daily life. And I remember being a part of a discussion group where someone was mentioning how sometimes, for example, on a Monday morning after a long weekend, right before going into a meeting for work, it can feel really challenging to have the time and space to ask that question, who am I? And to work with this practice. And it made me think, well, actually, maybe that's one of the most beautiful moments to ask the question, who am I? To really, when we're inundated with all of that comes from daily life, sitting with the question for just even a moment, who am I? Ah, yes. And sometimes that can just be exactly what we need to cut through and to come back to that remembrance. Another attitude or thing I think is quite important to cultivate in this process of integration is an open heart. There's a couple different aspects that I want to highlight about living with an open heart. What does it mean to live with an open heart? So the first aspect, or the first element that I'd love to talk about is living with an open heart towards oneself and towards others. So being able to embrace and hold in love and compassion oneself and others, in the face of judgment, in the face of fears or discomforts or dislikes. And related to this is a quote from Ram Dass that I really love, where he says, "Treat everyone you meet like God in drag." And I feel like that really sums up, living with this open heart and seeing this beauty and seeing with love and compassion and from this heart others and oneself, seeing them as God in drag, or whatever you want to call it, this divine in drag. And he has this quote about living with an open heart towards oneself and others that I'd love to read. He says, "I've watched the process of looking at another person, the way I do it all the time, and looking beyond my reactivity to their individual differences, to see a fellow soul in there. I feel my heart does a very different thing with a fellow soul than it does with a woman or a man or achiever or judging mind, my protective stance. I see a fellow soul. You here? I'm here. They don't have to tell you they're there because you just see it. So I practice turning my receptor to tune to that in other people." So I really love this practice that he's outlined of seeing the soul in somebody else. And when judgments come up, when that judging mind comes up, can we see the soul? Can we see the God? Can we see the divine in ourselves, in others? Which is a very helpful practice in this integration of daily life into spirituality. Another aspect of living with an open heart is to embrace and allow ourselves to feel all the feelings. Detachment from the ego doesn't mean a suppression of or a passivity towards the feelings that come up. But can we feel them fully and accept them and even treat them with what's coming up with love as what is? Feelings of difficulty, of pain, of joy and bliss, can we just allow ourselves to feel them without attachment, without judgment, and to just fully embrace them, again, from this place of an open heart. Another aspect of this open heart, or cultivating this open heart, that I'd love to touch upon is this idea of following the longing of one's heart. Um, yeah, and just sitting that for a moment. What would life look like if I were to follow the longing of my heart in every direction that I take, in every choice that I make, in every way that I'm being, in every day? What would that be like if I was following the longing of my heart? And a helpful question that I heard in retreat one time is, what in life doesn't align with your heart's longing and knowing? And that can be something interesting to sit with as we look at, in encompassing daily life into this home of remembrance, of this divine that we know, that we feel, that we believe. Another thing I want to touch upon in terms of this open heart is, what are some things that can help us cultivate this open heart, actually, so that we can be more open and loving to others and ourselves, and allow ourselves to feel and follow that longing heart? What are some things that can sort of strengthen this open heart? And for that, I encourage and invite all of us to find the things that really nurture, that we feel nurture our hearts, that we feel nourish our souls, that bring us a sense of aliveness, of openness, a sense of connection, that generate a sense of enthusiasm in life. Enthusiasm coming from the word entheos, which means the God within. So finding and incorporating into our daily life also things that make us feel this God within, that make us feel this aliveness, that feed our souls, can really help us to continue on in all other areas of daily life with this open heart. Things like being in service, like dancing, like singing, being out in nature. As I mentioned, things that generate a sense of enthusiasm and aliveness in oneself. What is that for you? It could be rock climbing for one person, surfing for another, cooking, just sharing a moment by a fire with a loved one. Find those things. Nourish your heart. Nurture your heart. Nourish your soul. And we'll find that living with this open heart can become easier. This open heart that helps us incorporate daily life into this spirituality and invites it in. Another aspect I'll quickly go through is this sense of trust and letting go. So letting go of expectations that we may have, limitations of the ego, fixations that we may have, and really cultivating this trust in the divine and offering up all that we do, all that we are, all that is and that happens to the divine, can really support this integration of daily life into spirituality. In the face of anything, can we trust? Can we surrender to the divine, and let go of those expectations that we have, of those fixations that we have, of those attachments that we have, and just trust. Just trust. And we'll find that in time, more and more, we can dissolve any tendencies or habits or patterns or pains that we may have from daily life into that truth and that knowingness and that divine. and that remembrance. And lastly, this sense of aspiration that I wanted to highlight because I feel is very important to cultivate and this for integration. First, knowing, checking in with ourselves. Is this something we truly seek, to make these changes, to make these shifts in our lives, to cut down certain paradigms that we've been living under? It's not always going to be comfortable. It's not always going to be easy. But are we willing to do it? And are we passionate about doing it? Is there a fire that burns within us? That this view, that these truths bring about in us? And if that is there, if there is a fire in us, how can we cultivate this sense of aspiration and keep that fire alive and keep that flame alive and strong? Finding things that stoke the fire, finding others that stoke the fire. And some practices could be, quotes, poetry, teachings, retreats, intense experiences, of course, but also in the daily. How do we keep that aspiration alive? I remember hearing from a fellow soul that he starts every day. The first thing he does every morning, he has a book by his side of quotes, and then quotes that bring about this sense of passion, this flame, this fire within. And every morning he begins the day by reading a quote. And that sort of helps cultivate that aspiration. And so that when we face those things in daily life, when we find ourselves immersed, yes, there's still that fire that's burning there that reminds us that there's that home to come back to, and to keep coming back if we find ourselves taken or astray. And just quickly, a few things to keep in mind or remember in the process, and I'll go quickly, to keep a sense of patience. Sahaja always would talk about the fact that enlightenment can be instantaneous, but it's the deconditioning that can take a lifetime. So knowing that this process of integration, this from daily life into spirituality, is ongoing and perhaps will never end, actually. It takes time. It takes time to change habits. It takes time to change patterns, to change paradigms, especially when that's been the conditioning that we've had for all our lives. So can we remember that and be patient with ourselves and with this process, and that it's okay, that it's going to take time, and just remembering that. And with that, the next reminder, or the thing to remember in the process, is compassion. Compassion for yourself in this process. Knowing that it's going to take time, giving yourself the time and space. For example, after retreat, have you given yourself the time and space to come back and start incorporating little by little daily life into that place of remembrance, and this, remembering this sense of compassion and holding this process and ourselves and the things that present themselves in daily life, holding them in love, even if it takes years to change, or even if they don't change for a whole lifetime. Can we still see ourselves with love and hold those patterns, those tendencies with love, and share compassion for ourselves and this process. There's a poem by Hafez that I always think of when I think of patience and compassion with this process, and it's called 10,000 Idiots. And it goes, "It is always a danger to aspirants on the path when they begin to believe and act as if the 10,000 idiots who so long ruled and lived inside have all packed their bags and skipped town or died." Yeah, and for me, it's just this paints this wonderful picture and reminder that, just these moments of connecting to those truths and awareness of these tendencies or misalignments doesn't mean poof, they're gone. And that they've so long ruled and lived inside, and to remember, be patient and compassionate, that it was a process to get them to move out and move on. And I'll just touch upon one last thing to keep in mind in the process is the importance of community. We can build a strength and stability in our view, in our practice, but it does matter where we are and who we are surrounded by, because inevitably that will pervade us. And for this, it is extremely supportive, extremely helpful to bring awareness into and to cultivate a sense of community, to surround ourselves with this spiritual assembly and by other lovers, by other aspirants on the path, as Hafez said, so that we may have others to share with, to inspire us, to feel connected to be in this process with, to fan each other's flames. Yeah. And to walk alongside each other on this way back home to ourselves, to who and what we really are. That's all I have to share. I think we just have a few moments for some questions, if there are any. I'll check in the comments. And also, if you think of any questions afterwards, or if you're viewing this video afterwards, of course, feel free to get in touch, to ask a question, or even just chat. I'm very, very interested in and passionate about this topic of integration. So I would happily speak about it with anybody. So I'm looking at this question from Sabina. What are some of the things that you find enthusiasm in and have consciously incorporated in your life to help integrate daily life into that enthusiasm sense of divine? Yeah. Thank you for that question. So, enthusiasm. The ones that I think of immediately are some of the ones that I actually shared. But I would say one of the most prominent ones that comes to mind is dancing. Ooh, if we're saying, if we're thinking about this enthusiasm coming from that word entheos, and signifying that God within. Wow. When dancing, it really feels like just this flowing, this resting in the divine. And yeah, I find, especially in this time of the pandemic, when there's not as many opportunities to go out and dance with others, I've incorporated it into my own just practice at home sometimes of just dancing. And it brings about this enthusiasm, this touching upon this divine of who and what I really am. And from that, I find that a lot of the things that maybe were presenting themselves in daily life, fears, attachments, judgments, it just melts that. It melts it away. And so sometimes I can use this practice as well as for when I feel really immersed or full, very far or taken from myself, from home, and just dance. And that always brings me back. It always brings me back. And yeah, and I feel like kind of encompasses and then allows to dissolve all those things that I had become preoccupied with from daily life. So I hope that answers your question, Sabina. Also things like, I mean, there's so many things that bring me enthusiasm that I try to do weekly. It also helps that I'm a very active person, but capoeira, rock climbing, jumping in the water, yeah, so many things. And I invite all of you to find those things and find ways to make that more a part of your daily life, to allow for those other things in daily life to be held by these moments, by these remembrances. Thank you, Fiona. If there are no more questions, I already went a couple minutes over. So I'll just wrap it up here. Perhaps we can just take a moment to close. So taking a moment to close the eyes softly, taking a deep breath. And coming into this closeness with our hearts. And remembering the sense of home that we can always come back to. And whenever you're ready, you can open the eyes. Namaste. Thank you all very much. Sending everybody much love.